Dear friends, who from the Bible would you pick if you had to pick one person? Who would you pick as your hero of faith? Could be from the Old Testament, could be from the New Testament, doesn't matter. And no, it can't be from Luke chapter 7. So who is it? I imagine if you pick somebody from the Old Testament, maybe one of the more popular, or some of the more popular names would be Noah or Abraham or Moses or King David. After all, Noah spent up to 120 years building an ark because God told him to. Abraham was old, his wife, well past childbearing years, yet God had promised them that they would have a child. He told Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation and that all nations on earth would be blessed through him. And Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Then you have Moses, who certainly had his moments of weakness, yes, but there was that one time where he actually told God that he couldn't do something. He said, God, you can't destroy the Israelites, even though they're rebelling repeatedly against you. And then you have King David, yes, the man whom God said was a man after his own heart. If you pick somebody from the New Testament, maybe some of the popular names would have been John the Baptist or the Apostle Peter or the Apostle Paul, all men who ended up dying for their faith. And there's so many others. Maybe you can see where I'm going with this. But I would imagine if it weren't today, when we had Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10 as our gospel lesson and as the basis for our sermon, and you were asked that question, who would be your one hero of faith from the Bible? I would submit that probably none of us would have picked the centurion. And yet Jesus, the Son of God, pays the centurion a compliment, the likes of which he paid to no one else. Here's a literal translation of the Greek of Jesus' words. I say to you, not in all Israel have I found faith such as this. So if we're going to look to someone whose faith is worth imitating, let's look to the person Jesus points us to this morning. Let's look at that faith that amazed Jesus. And let's pray this morning. Lord, give us such a faith as this. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus had just spent some time teaching crowds of people, and included in those crowds were his disciples. And so when he got done, he went back to Capernaum, which was kind of his home base during his time up in the northern region of Israel, of Galilee. Capernaum was a town that was situated right on the shores, the northwestern shores of the Sea of Galilee. And Capernaum was home to several of Jesus' disciples, Peter, James, John, Matthew. And it was also home to a Roman garrison. And the commander of that garrison was a centurion, a guy who had about 100 soldiers under his command. And this particular centurion in Capernaum had a servant whom he, as you just heard, valued highly, whom he deeply cared about, whom he greatly respected, whom he highly honored. And this servant had fallen ill, gravely ill, so ill that he was actually about to die. And so listen to verse 3 again. Having heard about Jesus, he, that's the centurion, sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. Now, we aren't told exactly what the centurion heard about Jesus. But what are we told? We are told that here in this moment, in this dire circumstance, in this seemingly hopeless situation, the centurion turns to the one and only person who can help in any and every hour of need. He turns to Jesus. And thus we arrive at our first point about great faith. Great faith turns to Jesus for help. Luke 7 goes on. When they, that's the Jewish elders, came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying, He, the centurion, is worthy of having you do this for him because he loves our nation and he built our synagogue for us. This centurion and the relationship that he had with the local people in Capernaum, it defies all expectation, doesn't it? Because if you were a Jew living in Capernaum at this time, chances are you might expect that a Roman military officer would be cold and calloused. After all, it was the centurion's job to make sure that the local population stayed in check. We might expect that the local Jews would have hated the Romans and especially hated the guy in charge of them. But what happened? When the centurion sent word to Jesus, he didn't send some of his underling soldiers to Jesus. No, some of the elders of the Jews went to Jesus on the centurion's behalf. And they didn't do that because they were coerced to do so. No, they wanted to do this. And when they got to Jesus, they had nothing but glowing things to say about him. They credited him with building their place of worship, their synagogue. You see, this centurion had spent the time and he had made the effort caring about the people, building a relationship of trust with them. And they cared about him. Brothers and sisters, great faith shows itself in loving and caring actions toward others. So Jesus went with these Jewish elders who came to him on behalf of the centurion. They were making their way to the centurion's house when some more friends of the centurion meet them before they even get there. And those friends of the centurion have a message for Jesus. Lord, don't trouble yourself. I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I didn't consider myself worthy to come to you. Wow. The centurion sent messengers on his behalf, not because he was so high and mighty that he couldn't be bothered to handle the situation himself. No. He didn't feel that he was worthy even to be in Jesus' presence. He didn't think that he was worthy to have Jesus come to his home and step foot under his roof. This centurion knew the score. He knew that he was sinful, and therefore he knew that he was unworthy of Jesus. We have a word for that, don't we? Humble. Great faith shows itself in true humility. The message went on. Say the word, and my servant will be healed. Now, for this centurion, life in the military meant that he was used to things happening a certain way. He was used to having it where orders were given to people under his command, and those orders would be carried out. What he had said would happen. He was used to the fact that whenever he told his servant to do something, he knew that it would be done. And so now, with Jesus, he doesn't need Jesus to come to his home. He doesn't personally need to see Jesus heal his servant. No, all he needs is for Jesus to say the word, to give the order. And he knows that his servant will be healed. Great faith takes Jesus at his word. If Jesus says it, it's going to happen. And it's interesting, actually, because in the rest of this account in Luke 7, do you notice that Luke doesn't record for us Jesus actually saying the word? It simply says that the friends of the centurion returned to the house, and what they find? They found the servant healed. And so we can't help but nod our heads in vigorous agreement when Jesus says, I tell you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Yes, great faith indeed. How's yours? Would you call your faith great? Would Jesus? Do we have the faith of the centurion? Do we have that great faith? When you need help, do you drop down to your knees right on the spot and take it to your Lord in prayer? Or do you search for answers and solutions to all those cares and concerns and problems in all sorts of places? The world, others, yourself, maybe even forgetting to pray altogether. Do you show genuine love for others? Do you take the time and make the effort to be a benefit and a blessing to somebody else, simply to be a benefit and a blessing to somebody else? Even people who are different from you. Even at great personal expense? Or do we find that we are more apt to help when we get something out of it? Do you approach God in due humility? Remembering that you and I, we don't deserve a thing. We don't deserve a thing from Him. Or do you expect God to just make things go the way you want, as if you were entitled to His grace? Do you take Jesus at His word and in all of His promises to you? Or do you insist on God taking care of you in exactly the way you want in order for you to believe that He truly does care for you? Brothers and sisters, I'm with you. The words of the hymn writer serve as a very fitting prayer for us. Lord, give us such a faith as this. A great faith. And wouldn't you know that the Lord has already answered that prayer? That great faith of the centurion, by God's grace, it's ours as well. It is. After all, let's ask this. Where did this centurion get this great faith from? Did he conjure it up in himself? Did he really have to work and work and work at it so that he would believe well enough so that Jesus would pay him this compliment? No, we were told where he got this faith. Luke chapter 7, verse 3. Having heard about Jesus. The centurion heard about Jesus. You know the passage. Faith, where does it come from? From hearing the message. And the message is heard through the word about Christ. Yes, great faith comes from hearing about Jesus. From hearing about who he is, from hearing about what he has done, what he continues to do, and what he will do. Brothers and sisters, what makes faith great is not the act of believing. What makes faith great is its object. It's what you believe and trust in. It's who you believe and trust in. The centurion trusted in the all-powerful and gracious Son of God who came with the message of good news and who confirmed that message with miracles, showing his power over sin and all of its dread consequences. And brothers and sisters, so do we. We believe in that same Jesus by God's grace. So do you want the faith of the centurion, the faith such as this? Then look to Jesus. Do you want faith that is going to turn to Jesus at every moment that you need help? Then look to Jesus in his word, because there he tells you just how much he wants you to come to him. Cast all your anxieties, all your cares, all your concerns on him, because he cares for you. Do you want a faith that shows genuine love to others? Then look to Jesus. Look to Jesus, who spent his earthly days and years here bringing the good news of salvation to people, showing his power over sin and its dread consequences by doing things like healing the sick and making the paralyzed walk and making the blind see, and yes, even raising the dead to life. Look to Jesus, who lived perfectly for you, who suffered hell so that you would never have to, who gave his life on a cross to buy yours, and who rose victorious from the dead, and all of it, to save you and me from sin, death, and hell, and instead to give us forgiveness of sins, life, and eternal salvation. Do you want a faith that is humble? Then look to Jesus, who, being in very nature God, didn't consider equality with God something to be held on to, but no, he humbled himself. He made himself nothing, and he became obedient to death on a cross for you. Do you want a faith that takes Jesus at his word? Then go to Jesus in his word. Because there you will find all of the promises he makes to you. There you will find all of the promises he keeps to you. And the Spirit will work that great faith in you. Look to Jesus, because faith placed in him is great faith. Look to Jesus for such a faith as this. Amen.